Happy Sunday morning, boys and girls. It's your old pal, Andy France, the grand poobah of Judson Sunday School. Welcome back to another episode of Virtual Judson Sunday School. Let's begin today's episode with a question. What are 3 of the scariest words you could ever hear? Oh, and I don't mean President Donald Trump. Let's forget that guy. Let's go with 3 other scary words. Any ideas? How about the internet's down, or no video games? Yikes! Andy, anything but that, please. How about this? Here's 3 more scary words. The park's closed, or eat your asparagus. No, thank you. I've got one more. This one's just for me. I'm getting older, a little forgetful in my old age. I worry that one day I might be wandering my neighborhood and a stranger comes up to me and says, "Hey, mister, forgot your pants." Yikes! So, all of those are scary words, but I think 3 of the scariest words you could ever hear are these. You're in trouble. Yikes, you're in trouble. And the only thing scarier than those 3 words, you're in trouble, are when they are accompanied by that little sing-song melody we all know so well. It's planted deep in our brains. You're in trouble, you're in trouble. Oh, shivers. Trouble. That's our word of the day. What does trouble mean? Well, when trouble is a noun, it means difficulty, problems, an unfortunate position. And when we use trouble as a verb, it means to worry or agitate or to cause distress or anxiety. As kids, whenever we hear someone's in trouble, we just assume they've done something wrong and they're probably about to be punished. They're in hot water and they're about to catch it. Oh, but not you. No, you kids would never get in trouble. You're angels. You would never get in trouble. Would you?
Oh, hi. I usually get in trouble for watching on my iPad when I'm not supposed to and stealing snacks from the kitchen.
One time in kindergarten, I got sent to the office, but no one was there. So I took a bite out of one of the cookies, but put it back when someone came into the room. And when they brought me back to the class, I announced to the teachers that I had taken a bite out of one of the cookies. So I was sent back to the office.
I decided I wanted to make my room more bright and colorful, so without getting my parents' permission, I painted small stripes on my walls and put different art stuff and things I like on it too. And I was really scared that I would get in trouble, but they ended up really liking it.
Well, there was multiple times, but I'm going to tell you about this one time, and I don't cut my hair like this today, and I don't cut my hair, where, it was for my first day of kindergarten, and the day before I had went to a special barber shop to get my hair done. I decided that I wanted to cut my hair, and I don't remember what way, but it was in this so bad way that my mom had to shave my whole head.
It's true. And send you to school.
And send me to school.
Mm-hmm. Ruby, do you remember a time when you did something a little bad?
Well, one time we were at Martha's Vineyard, and one time I sneaked under the couch, and I had scissors in my hand, and then I cut my hair under the couch. And nobody was looking, only Rocco.
Zach,
Yeah, and so
I see a theme here.
I also didn't tell her, so I got in trouble after that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he colored his hair too.
Yeah.
I didn't cut my hair.
Yes, he did. Oh, I like it.
So it sounds like we get in plenty of good trouble around here, huh?
All right.
Wow, what a bunch of troublemakers. Just kidding. Thank you so much, Owen and Theo and Sophia and Rocco and Ruby, for those troubling videos. Let's face it, we've all been in trouble at one time or another. Perhaps we've lost our temper, or we have told a lie, or we've used inappropriate language. Although not me, I would never use inappropriate language. Okay, or perhaps we've told a lie about not using inappropriate language. There are all kinds of ways to get into trouble. I recently read about a couple of kids who got into trouble because they decided to butter their dog. I'm not kidding. They actually used 2 entire sticks of butter on their chihuahua. As their mother later said, "Have you ever tried to catch a freshly buttered chihuahua?" A freshly buttered chihuahua is cute and funny, and I have no idea if those kids actually got into trouble or not. But I think we would all agree that there's nothing funny about getting into trouble. There are usually consequences. There's usually some sort of punishment involved. We spend our entire childhood being told the following: don't get into trouble. Don't cause any trouble. Stay out of trouble. Don't go looking for trouble. But what if I were to tell you that I want you to get into trouble? And furthermore, I want you to go looking for trouble. How about that? What? Well, let me explain. Before I get fired or you guys get arrested for grand theft auto, what I really want is for you guys to go out and get into some good trouble. Let me just put the word up there for you. G-O-O. Or maybe you just need to get into some goo trouble. Nope, let's stick with good trouble. What do I mean by good trouble? Well, to answer that, I need to introduce you to someone. Boys and girls, there are heroes in this life, and then there are heroes. Meet John Lewis, a hero if ever there was one. John Lewis only stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, but he was a giant among men. Now, it's somewhat appropriate that we are looking at one of John's many, many mugshots. A mugshot is a picture that the police take when they're arresting you, when they're booking you on some charge or another. And John Lewis was only arrested some 45 times throughout the course of his lifetime. But it was John Lewis who came up with this idea of good trouble, which he described as the kind of trouble you can be proud of, standing up to authority, standing up for what you believe in. John said, "My philosophy is very simple. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, say something, do something, get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble." John Lewis spent his life getting into good trouble. He was front and center at nearly every major event of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, beginning with his work desegregating lunch counters in Nashville, Tennessee. Now, if the word segregate means to separate the races, keeping whites and African Americans apart, what does the word desegregate mean? It means to bring those same races together, to allow people of different races to mix. This is John Lewis's mugshot from 1960 when he got arrested in Nashville trying to desegregate those lunch counters. And thanks to the courage of John and many others like him, Nashville became the first major city in the South to permit whites and African Americans to eat together in public. Over the next 60 years, John would continue to get into trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble, right up until his death this past July at the age of 80. John said, "We've all been called to do something. We only pass this way once. We have to give it everything we have. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise, to get in good trouble." So kids, let's learn more about the remarkable life of John Lewis as we read today's story, John Lewis in the Lead, a story of the civil rights movement, written by Jim Haskins and Kathleen Benson, illustrated by Benny Andrews. Now, with apologies to the authors, this book is a little long, it's a little wordy, and so I'm going to skip the occasional paragraph just for brevity's sake. But I would ask you to pay as close attention as you can to the very dramatic life that John Lewis led. No one gave more to the cause of civil rights than John Lewis did. He was repeatedly arrested and beaten savagely time and time and time again, not just by the Ku Klux Klan, but by policemen and state troopers as well. This story ends with John's being elected to the United States House of Representatives, the Congress, from Atlanta, Georgia, where John was known as the conscience of the Congress. You know what conscience means? It's that sense we all have of right and wrong. Let's learn more about John as we read John Lewis in the Lead. John Lewis was born at a time when the winds of change were blowing, just waiting for someone to catch them and hold on long enough for everyone to feel the breeze. During the time John was growing up, the South was segregated. Black people were kept apart from white people. It was against the law for blacks to eat in white restaurants. Black children could not go to the same schools as white children. Black people had to sit in the back of public buses and give up their seats to whites if the, quote, white seats in the front were filled. John realized that segregation was keeping his family from having a better life. This made him angry, but his parents warned John to stay quiet. Don't get in trouble, they said. Don't get in the way. One day when he was 15, John heard Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on the radio. Dr. King was a preacher in Montgomery, Alabama, and he was talking about the bus boycott. Black people in Montgomery had stopped riding the buses to protest bus segregation. When Dr. King said segregation was wrong, John felt as though Dr. King were speaking directly to him, telling him it was time to get in the way. It was time to turn things upside down in order to set them right side up. And you can see the word boycott coming out of the radio. After graduating from high school in 1957, John went to Nashville, Tennessee to study to become a minister. He wrote to Dr. King, who invited John to visit Montgomery. When they met, Dr. King said they could fight the injustice of segregation peacefully. He told John to study the life of Mohandas K. Gandhi, who had led nonviolent protests in India. John liked Gandhi's idea of nonviolent resistance as a way to bring about social change. With this in mind, John organized sit-ins at lunch counters where blacks were not allowed to eat with whites. In 1961, he joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. The students went on freedom rides to challenge segregation at interstate bus terminals. Blacks and whites sat next to each other on buses that traveled from state to state. John's commitment to nonviolence would soon be tested. In May 1961, a bus carrying John and other freedom riders arrived at the Montgomery, Alabama bus station. John was the first one off the bus. Aside from a group of newspaper reporters, the streets were strangely deserted. John had just begun to deliver a statement to the reporters when suddenly hundreds of white people came running from behind buildings and around corners, waving baseball bats, boards, bricks, tire irons, hoes, and rakes. They screamed out insults. "Let's all stand together," John cried, as the mob attacked the Freedom Riders. Someone hit John on the head with a wooden crate, and he fell to the ground. After being treated at a local hospital, John was anxious to rejoin his group and carry on. The brutal attack was big news, and Dr. King was concerned. He rushed to Montgomery and tried to convince John to protect himself and stop the rides, but John would not. So with a bandaged and bruised John Lewis at his side, Dr. King held a press conference to announce that the Freedom Rides would continue. Over the next 2 years, John led many protests. He was often beaten and arrested, but he did not give up. He believed segregation was unjust. He was committed to bringing people together to fight for their civil rights. In August 1963, John was invited to speak at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. The gathering was intended to make Congress pass a civil rights bill that would guarantee equal rights for black people. 23-year-old John Lewis was the youngest speaker on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial that day. He spoke out against segregation and promised to continue leading nonviolent protests. Dr. King was there too. He delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, expressing the hope that one day all Americans would be free to enjoy equal rights and opportunities. The March on Washington had an impact. The following year, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, making racial discrimination in restaurants, bus stations, and other public places illegal and requiring equal employment opportunities for all citizens. John now turned his attention to voters' rights. With his help, SNCC made plans to register Southern black people to vote. It would be a hard task. Many white people could not bear the thought of black people having the freedom to vote. They felt threatened and feared that blacks would gain political power over them. In January 1965, John went to Selma, Alabama. More than 15,000 black adults were eligible to vote in the county where Selma was located, but only about 300 were registered. John and other SNCC workers began leading groups of people to the city courthouse in Selma to register to vote. Each time a group arrived, the clerk hung up a sign that read, "Out to lunch." It didn't matter what time of day they arrived, the sign always went up. Jim Clark, the sheriff of Selma, was determined not to let blacks register to vote. When he realized they would continue to wait to enter the courthouse, Sheriff Clark ordered his officers to block the entrance. During 3 days of peaceful protests, more than 200 people were arrested, including John. One night, after a rally to support people trying to register to vote in Marion, a city near Selma, a group started marching to the courthouse. Suddenly, the streetlights went out, and police began attacking the marchers. To seek safety, a woman and her son ran into a small cafe. A policeman started hitting the woman, and her son, Jimmy Lee Jackson, was shot as he tried to protect her. He died soon after. Hundreds of people crowded into the church to hear Dr. King preach at Jimmy Lee Jackson's funeral. Afterward, John walked with Dr. King and 1,000 other mourners to the graveyard. Along the way, someone suggested that they keep walking right to Montgomery, the state capitol, and deposit the casket on the Capitol steps. Jimmy was buried in Marion that day, but back in Selma, many people liked the idea of a march to Montgomery. Montgomery was 54 miles from Selma. Fear mixed with excitement at the idea of a march that would take about 5 days. There were also rumors that Alabama Governor George Wallace would let state troopers do whatever was necessary to prevent the Selma to Montgomery march. Dr. King was supposed to lead the marchers, but after receiving threats on his life, he asked his close friend, Reverend Hosea Williams, to take his place. Late in the afternoon on Sunday, March 7th, 1965, John Lewis and Reverend Williams stood at the head of a group of nearly 600 people. From Brown Chapel AME Church, they marched to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which led out of Selma. Several dozen of Sheriff Clark's men watched the marchers as they passed. At the crest of the bridge, John suddenly saw a sea of state troopers spread out across the highway. On either side and behind them were more of Sheriff Clark's men, some riding horses. The commander of the troopers, Major John Cloud, raised his bullhorn. "This is an unlawful assembly," he boomed. "You are ordered to disperse and go back to your church or your homes." John stood at the top of the bridge. Ahead of him was the swarm of state troopers. Below him swirled the brown water of the river. All around were crowds of screaming, jeering people, their faces contorted with hate. And behind him were hundreds of courageous but frightened marchers, mothers and fathers, teenagers and teachers, beauticians and undertakers, farmers and mechanics. Again, Major Cloud raised the bullhorn to his lips. "You have 2 minutes to turn around and go back to your church," he shouted. John believed that everyone should have the right to vote and that they should not back down, but he saw they were trapped. They could not turn around. There were too many people on the bridge. They could not go forward either. That was inviting an attack by the state troopers. John could feel the marchers begin to panic. He knew they were waiting for him to tell them what to do. "We should all pray," John told Reverend Williams. The Reverend was thinking much the same thing. He asked Major Cloud if they could have a moment to pray. Just as those at the front of the march bowed their heads, and just 1 minute after his 2-minute warning, Major Cloud gave the order to attack. A wave of state troopers charged up the bridge. His head bowed in prayer, John heard the sounds of terror, the pounding of horses' hooves and troopers' heavy boots, the shouts and screams of men and women, the cries of frightened people trying to pray and be brave. Suddenly, a trooper swung his club at John, knocking him to the ground. John tried to protect his head as the trooper hit him again. Other marchers at the front of the group took blows too. Those behind them turned to go back, but there were so many people on the bridge it was hard to move. As the marchers tried to get away from the troopers, they were attacked by more of Sheriff Clark's men. The mob also attacked cameramen and reporters, but they couldn't stop them from reporting the violence. The pictures and television broadcasts of state troopers and policemen beating defenseless people brought the country face to face with the riot that would soon be known as Bloody Sunday. Although John was badly injured, he somehow made it back to Brown Chapel that night. The church and surrounding area were filled with people protesting what had happened on the bridge. John managed to speak to the crowd, and he asked President Judson to protect the marchers whose only desire was to register to vote. Then John allowed himself to be taken to the hospital. John had a serious head injury, a concussion. In the hospital, his feelings of helplessness were as bad as the physical pain. He didn't know what was going on outside. He wanted to know what had happened to the people on the bridge. Finally, reports began to trickle in. Bloody Sunday was a national scandal. There were demonstrations in more than 80 cities against the brutality of the Alabama police and troopers. There were calls for a federal law that would guarantee everyone the right to vote. By the time John was released from the hospital, he had real hope that black people would soon have the same voting rights as whites. John joined with Dr. King and other civil rights leaders to show Alabama and the nation that they would not give up. A new date, Sunday, March 21st, was set for a march from Selma to Montgomery. Word soon came that religious leaders, elected officials, celebrities, and ordinary people from across the country planned to join the march in support of voting rights for all Americans. This time, under the protection of federal troops, more than 3,000 people started out from Selma. Over 5 days, the sun burned down on the marchers and rain fell in torrents. But no one complained, no one gave up. We felt bonded with one another, with the people we passed, with the entire nation, John recalled. By the time the marchers reached Montgomery, they were 25,000 strong. 5 months later, President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which protected the rights of all Americans to vote. The act made it a crime to use force against anyone trying to register and vote. In 1986, 21 years after that historic act was passed, the votes of both black and white citizens elected John Lewis to the United States House of Representatives, where he continues to serve today as a congressman from Georgia. And like I said, John passed away this past July. John Lewis in the lead. Well, after such a long story, what do you say we sing? Do you have your sheet music, either your lyrics or your picture lyrics for Little Trip to Heaven? We went over the first verse last week. I'm going to sing through the first verse, and then we'll talk through the pictures of the second verse, and then we'll sing both the first and second verse. Does that sound okay to you? So, you're welcome to look along with me here at these pictures. Remember, it's little trip to heaven on the wings of your love. Banana moon is shining in the sky. I feel like I'm in heaven. Turn the page. When you're with me, I know that I'm in heaven when you smile. Though we're stuck here on the ground, turn to page 3. I got something that I found, and it's you. So we're in the middle of page 3 for verse number 2. Let's go through the pictures, shall we? I don't have to take. We have an I. We have the old don't walk sign for don't. Have, it's spelled differently, but there's Woody Woodpecker cutting that poor woman in half. I don't have to. Number 2, take out. I don't have to take no. All those folks look like they're going somewhere, don't they? I don't have to take no trip to. Now, this song, if you remember, has a lot of outer space pictures. There's outer space and constellation and different things like that. This is our first space picture. And it's, when you see this, just try and remember outer space. That rocket is headed to outer space. I don't have to take no trip to outer space. Turn to page 4. All I have to do is all detergent. Woody's cutting that woman in half again. Well, now I guess it would be cutting her in fourths since he already cut her in half. All I have to do, Mountain Dew, is look. This man is looking through a magnifying glass at your, U and R has a your sound. Face. There's lots of faces there, right? All I have to do is look at your face. And before I know it, before I, there's that no sound or sign, it, cousin it. Still get shivers again, just thinking about that hot Halloween costume. And before I know it, I'm in orbit around you. Here's our second outer space picture. This one has the planets orbiting around the sun. So I'm in orbit around, there's our roundabout sign, you. Turn to page 5. You have a Thanksgiving turkey. Thank in, the letter N, lucky, for a leprechaun, stars. Thanking my lucky stars that I found you. Lost and found, we had that in the first verse. When I see your constellation, yet another space picture. So we've got our girl winning the race, spelled differently, but when I see your, the letter C, your constellation. You see the moon is drawing pictures in the sky. That's what constellations are. Honey, you're my inspiration, and it's you. We got Pooh. The second time we've had Pooh in this. He's eating honey. You're, once again, inspiration. Have you ever seen a light bulb go off over somebody's head? They got an idea. They got some inspiration. And it's you. It's you. And I think that's the end. It is. That's the end of the second verse. So let's take from page 3. Let's make it complicated. Let's start at page 3. Where's page 3? I only have 3 pages up here. You think I could find my way? And do this second verse, starting with I don't have to take, the middle of page 3. Ready? I don't have to take no trip to outer space. Turn the page. All I have to do is look at your face. And by the way, that's the way that goes. Look at your face. And before I know it, I'm in orbit around you. Turn to page 5, which is page 3. Thanking my lucky stars that I found you. When I see your constellation, honey, you're my inspiration, and it's you. Let's sing the whole thing from the top. We'll do those 2 verses, and then we'll call it a day. This is like algebra or something. Finding the page numbers. Ready? From the top. 1, 2, 3, 4. Little trip to heaven on the wings of your love. Banana moon is shining in the sky. I feel like I'm in heaven. Turn the page. When you're with me. I know that I'm in heaven when you smile. Though we're stuck here on the ground, page 3, I got something that I found, and it's you. 3, 4, 1, 2, sing. I don't have to take no trip to outer space. Turn the page. All I have to do is look at your face, and before I know it, I'm in orbit around you. Page 5. Thanking my lucky stars that I found you. When I see your constellation, honey, you're my inspiration, and it's you. So there's just one more verse and then a big fancy ending. And it's you, shoo-ba-doo-ba-ba-da. And we'll learn that next week. Thanks. Well, we've done it again, boys and girls. We've somehow managed to get through yet another episode of Virtual Judson Sunday School. Just one quick announcement before we say our goodbyes and our thank yous. Next week's lesson is going to have something to do with jazz music and the new Disney Pixar movie, Soul. Have you seen it yet? If you haven't had a chance to see it and can see it this week, that would be great. But you don't have to see the movie to be a part of next week's lesson. I think you'll enjoy it. I hope you'll tune in next week. We're going to have some special guests, and I think we're going to have some fun. So, Let me just say, as always, a big thank you to Andre and Michelle for all their help putting this episode together. Let me thank you for being with us today as well. I'm going to leave you today with a short video of John Lewis. Not preaching, not marching, but dancing. John Lewis loved to dance, and I hope you love watching John Lewis dance. And so, until we meet again, have a great week. Stay safe, keep a place for Judson in your heart, and I'll see you next time on Virtual Judson Sunday School. Get in some good trouble this week.
I'm full. I'm so full I can't even move.
Give me the paper. I'm so happy. Go, Congressman. I'm so happy. Sing the song, Congressman. Sing. I'm happy.
I'm happy. I'm so happy. I'm happy.
There you go.